Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lena, this is Lena's Bookshelf, and today we're going to talk about all of the books I read in September. So I read 13 books in September, and September was very much a quantity over quality based month because I was a team leader for a team challenge that I was doing in the Facebook book club that I am a part of, and unfortunately we didn't win, but we had a really great time, and so I was basically just trying to crank out as many books as I can to help my team win. So I did read 13 books in September, and I had no 5 stars, but I also had no 1 stars. So I had a lot of 2 and 3 stars and then a couple of 4 stars. So first we're going to talk about my 2-star books. So I have 3 of them. So this first book that I gave 2 stars to is Last Woman Standing by Amy Gentry. And I was really excited about this book because I read Good Is Gone by Amy Gentry years ago, and I really loved it. But this book just really missed the mark. It's about a female comedian who meets this woman, and together they try to get revenge on men that wronged them in the past. So I thought it was going to be like a good for her type of thriller, like righting the wrongs of men, but I just didn't understand the thrilling aspect. There was no thrilling aspect, there was no mystery, everything unfolded very almost lazily. It just felt like the author had a good idea in the beginning and got in over her head and then had no idea how to resolve anything in the story. And the characters were not likable, and I had a hard time understanding how our main character was ever actually in any danger. The next book I gave 2 stars to is The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda, and I picked this up at a little free library, and it is going to go right back to a little free library. So this is about a girl who basically disappeared as a child and was found in like a storm grate or something, storm drain type of thing. And the man who found her, she and he both became famous, and this girl's mother kind of used her disappearance and her discovery as kind of a way to get money. She had to do all of these TV appearances and all of these things, and her mom kind of used it and kind of played off of that scenario for a long time in order to get money and sympathy from people and things like that. So she changes her name and moves away from Widow Hills and is trying to restart her life. And then one day she is sleepwalking and she steps on a dead body outside her yard, and that dead body happens to be the body of the man who saved her life all those years ago. And this was just confusing. There was a lot going on. The characters didn't make sense. There was no character development. And then in the end, I was just kind of like, what? Wait, what? And if you've read this, you might understand what I'm talking about, but I just felt like there was no resolution. I felt like while it wasn't right for her mother to, use her tragedy as a child as a way to make money and a way to gain fame, I was kind of confused on why this girl felt the need to cover up her identity. So it was just very strange to me. I once again, just like the last book, I was like, is this woman really in any danger? Why is she trying to keep her identity such a secret? Because it's really not a secret. It was national news. I don't know. It was just very strange. And I really disliked the other Megan Miranda book that I read. So I think that's the end of my experience with Megan Miranda. I think this author is just a no-go for me. And then the last book that I gave 2 stars was Counting Down to You by Tashi Bhuiyan. And this book I had to read for a prompt of a book that was written by a Gen X author. So right away I knew I wasn't going to like it because I don't like YA, I don't like middle grade, I don't even like new adult, much less young adult. And so obviously a Gen X author is going to write young adult because they're early 20s at the latest. So this was about a girl who is from a very strict family, and she's not allowed to date, and her parents go on a trip for a month and she's staying with her grandmother. And while her parents are gone, she meets this boy. He's kind of the bad boy at school, and she has to tutor him. One thing leads to another, and they start, a flirtation, and the whole time she's like, no, I can't date you because my parents are very strict, but then she does it anyway. And she's like, well, I'll just stay in for a month until my parents come back. And then of course you can guess how that turns out. And she doesn't want to go to college for the things that her parents want her to go to college for. Just very, very basic. Nothing in this book was, everything in this book happened exactly how you'd expect it to happen. It just felt very formulaic for a typical YA romance. And it wasn't for me, but I knew that going into it. I knew I wasn't the target audience for this book. I was just reading it for a prompt. Do I recommend this book to somebody my age that does not like YA? Definitely not. But would I recommend this to somebody who is a young adult that really likes that young adult coming of age story? Absolutely. I think it would be great when read by the targeted audience. Okay, moving on to the 5 books that I gave 3 stars. The first of which being Sex Cult Nun by Faith Jones, and this is a nonfiction true crime memoir about a woman who was born and raised into a sex cult, which I knew that sex cults were a thing in America, but I didn't realize how late they were a thing. I was thinking they stopped being a thing like in the 70s, but apparently not. And apparently it's still going on somewhere in the US. And so Faith basically relives her experience of growing up in a sex cult and what that was like and the trauma that went along with that. And the cult ran very similar to like the FLDS in the Mormon polygamous community. And so I definitely saw a lot of parallels there. The reason that I only gave this 3 stars is because, well, I know it's about a sex cult. And so obviously I know there's going to be a lot of talk about child assault and incest and things like that. I didn't feel that it needed to be so explicit throughout the whole book and so descriptive. If you have children, definitely go into this knowing that that is there. Definitely look up trigger warnings. Definitely ask yourself if this is something that you're ready to read, because I don't have children, but that is one thing that I really don't, just makes me feel icky in books, is having to read about child sexual assault with extreme descriptions and also incest. So definitely know that going into it. The other reason that I rated it a little bit lower than I typically would rate a memoir is because I felt like she went through her experience growing up and then she was like, yep, and then I left. And then that was like the end of the book. And part of what I really usually enjoy about memoirs is seeing where they are now, what their life is like now, what they've learned, how they interact with people and how they respond and what they're doing now, what their family is doing now, all of that, how being in this cult shaped their worldview, all of those things. And I felt like I didn't get any of that from this book. Next, we have The Prisoner by B.A. Paris, and I had an e-arc of this book from NetGalley, and I love B.A. Paris, and I have read every B.A. Paris publication, so I will continue to read B.A. Paris because I do like the writing style, but this one just kind of missed the mark. So this woman and her husband are kidnapped and put in this dark room, and they are being held for ransom, and they're told that your husband's very rich father has to basically pay your ransom. And then she realizes that this is more than just a regular kidnapping and ransom. There's more going on. It had thrilling parts, and then it would be just really boring. And then it had another thrilling chapter, and then it would be really boring. And it didn't make sense. So I don't know what to say about this book, because everything that I have just tried to say, I'll have to cut out because it's spoilers. Basically, the book did something that I don't like, and it just felt, again, like a cheap way to finish the book. It was just very forgettable, nothing earth-shattering, nothing that I haven't read before. So the next book that I gave 3 stars to is The Last Time I Saw You by Liv Constantine, and I read this book at the end of the month and I'm still having a hard time remembering it. It was pretty forgettable. Basically, this woman's mother is murdered in her house, and after the murder she starts getting these notes and these creepy deliveries and packages and messages from the murderer, and the murderer is doing a really good job of making her look very unreliable and almost crazy to people around her. Her marriage is struggling, and everybody has a motive to kill her mother, and very few people have an alibi, and so she's just trying to figure out who murdered my mother, who is sending me all of these creepy messages. That's really it. It was very basic, nothing earth-shattering. I I'm not a big fan of rich people drama. And so, yeah, 3 stars, just kind of forgettable. Not the worst domestic thriller that I've ever read, but also not the best. If you're gonna read a Liv Constantine, I highly recommend The Last Mrs. Parrish and not this one. The next 3-star thriller that I read was The Blame Game by Sandy Jones, and pretty similar to the other 3-star domestic thrillers that I've read, this one was pretty forgettable. It's a woman who's a psychiatrist, and she gets way too invested in her patients and their lives, and she kind of crosses some lines, and she crosses lines against her husband's wishes and pisses him off. And she lives in England, but she is an American, and you quickly learn why she's living in England and not in America. And it just felt like too many thriller tropes that all tried to be pulled together and didn't really work out well. Forgettable, and also kind of one of those endings that you're like, what? That wouldn't happen. It was just kind of a very basic 3-star domestic thriller. The last 2 books that I gave 3 stars to were both by Stephen King. The first is Finn by Stephen King, and this is actually not a full-length novel. It is a short story, and it is on Scribd. I think it's a Scribd exclusive, but basically you're following this man, Finn, and he has had really bad luck. And continuing on with his bad luck, he is kidnapped, and it's a case of mistaken identity. They think he's somebody else. And it was cute, basic. It took me maybe an hour to listen to. It was just, yeah, very basic short story. And I read that one for the Losers Club readathon. And then the other Stephen King book I read, I also read for the Losers Club readathon, and it was the buddy read, and that is 1922. And this story is about a man who doesn't want to sell his land, and his wife wants to sell his land. So naturally, what do you do when you disagree with your wife? You kill her, and you convince your son to help you. And as you can imagine, she starts haunting him, and it leads to the worst year of his life, basically, in 1922, trying to keep the farm, basically. I liked the descriptive elements of this book. I definitely was like grossed out and creeped out by all of the creepy horror things that happened. Definitely check trigger warnings for animal killings, animal murder, and some other things. Definitely look up trigger warnings, but overall I enjoyed this. I definitely think that it is similar to other Stephen King books where you kind of have to just kind of enjoy the ride and not think about it too hard. And also you have to expect some things that probably wouldn't be said nowadays. Overall, I think that the movie was actually, along with being the Losers Club buddy read, they also did a buddy watch during that readathon. And I liked the movie a lot more. I definitely recommend the movie over the book. I felt like there was way more character development, and I felt like it was a lot more emotional. And then last we have the 4 books that I gave 4 stars to. First of which being The Dancing Girls by M.M. Schunard, and I read this for the Upside Down Readathon. And this is about a serial killer who takes the bodies of his murder victims and contorts them into dancer poses. So this detective is trying to figure out who it is and why he's doing it. And overall, this was a really solid detective thriller. It didn't have those typical detective elements that I usually don't like. I felt like it was just enough of the detective POV to continue the storyline, but it wasn't like the main aspect of the book. I liked that you got the point of view of the detective, but you also got the point of view of the serial killer, and you also got the point of view of some of his victims. There also is a little bit of like a video game element to this, which was really cool, and I didn't know that going in. So overall, if you're looking for a quick, spooky serial killer detective thriller, definitely pick this one up because I never hear anybody talking about this, and I was very pleasantly surprised. The next book that I gave 4 stars to, I am actually shocked, and it is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. This is the first book in the Outlander series, and I've seen every episode of the TV show on Starz, but I've had this book sitting on my shelf for years, and I've always been scared of it because it's so long, and so I finally picked it up. And this isn't typically the type of historical fiction that I like. I typically like 1900s historical fiction. I want there to be electricity and running water and telephones and things like that, not as much of like torches and outhouses and horse-drawn wagons and stuff, but overall I really enjoyed this. If you have been living under a rock and don't know what Outlander is about, it is about a woman who is in World War I era, and she is visiting Scotland with her husband, and she accidentally gets transported back in time. So she is trying to figure out how to get back to her time and stay safe as a British woman in Scotland during a time when Britain and Scotland were not friends. And I just really enjoyed this. I listened to some of it on audio and I read some of it, and I read this in 3 days because it definitely holds your attention, but you definitely have to pay attention to it. Once you make the choice to pay attention to it, it flows really easily. But if you stop paying attention even for a couple minutes, you might miss a whole bunch and have to go back. So I definitely think it's worth checking out if you like historical fiction or if you like the show, because it definitely follows the show really well. And I feel like I learned so much in this book. The next book I gave 4 stars to, I am shocked, and it's Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. I couldn't tell you the last time I gave a Colleen Hoover romance a 4-star. Now I gave Verity and Layla 4 stars, but not her romances. I think the only other romance that I've given 4 stars from Colleen Hoover is November 9. And so this one I initially gave 3 stars, but then I upped it to a 4-star because I kept thinking about it. And so usually that tells me like, okay, it needs a little bit more than a 3. And so in this one, you're following a woman who moves in with her brother, who is a pilot, and across the hall is his very attractive pilot friend, who is very emotionally unavailable. So naturally she falls in love with him. And he's very honest with her that this needs to be basically just a friend's relationship, like friends with benefits and nothing else. We know how that works out, right? And you find out why he is emotionally unavailable and why he wants this friends with benefits transactional relationship, and it is heartbreaking. And I felt like there was so much character development, and there was just enough adult relationship type stuff, but it wasn't super smutty, and it was realistic. I feel like it was realistic. It met all of my expectations. It was sad. It was substantial. I just feel like if you are looking for an emotional romance that is more plot than smut and is realistic and has realistic expectations and realistic conversations and thought processes, definitely pick this one up. And then my last 4-star book is The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. And this is a book, it's pretty short and it's written in blog post forms. So this man is putting together all of these blog posts about his time when he was working at a psych hospital during his residency and a patient that was there. And this patient has this weird power where everybody who works with him ends up committing suicide. So this doctor, this young doctor in residency, thinks, I'm gonna be it. I'm gonna be the psychiatrist that fixes this guy. And this was so chilling and creepy. This is probably the first book that I have actually been creeped out and like genuinely creeped by. I generally am like, oh yeah, it's creeping, it's chilling, but no, this one actually scared me at parts because it was so much based on the mental power of this person. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be psychological, if it was going to be paranormal. Like I really wasn't sure where it was going, and I really liked that. It was a little unrealistic at times, especially the therapy notes. They were reading about the guy. I'm like, there's no way in heck any psychiatrist would ever be allowed to write therapy notes that way. That would never pass anything. Like that's so not how that would happen. And just some of the things I was like, I could tell that the author had probably never actually worked in a psych hospital or worked in any sort of psych treatment facility, but that also might just be me nitpicking because I do work in psych facilities. But overall, I think it would be a great, spooky, chilling read for this time of year. It's short, it's fast paced, it keeps you guessing, and I don't think you can really predict the ending. I didn't really try to, I just kind of went along for the ride, but I didn't really have any of those thoughts of like, oh yeah, I know where this is going. So I think it was really well done. Okay, those are all of the books that I read in September. Like I said, it was definitely quantity over quality, but there was a few shining stars in there too. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I just talked about and what you thought of them. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.